Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. This is the Insight segment. I'm Harold Fisher. Tonight, protests and unrest continue in Los Angeles as anger, frustration, and fear hit a boiling point over those ICE raids. A curfew is now in effect for parts of Los Angeles, with anti-ICE demonstrations now spreading to other U.S. cities. Now, meantime, President Trump is doubling down, vowing those raids will continue as he deploys more military troops to the area with promises to send more elsewhere.
In Los Angeles, the governor of California, the mayor of Los Angeles, they're incompetent, and they paid troublemakers, agitators, and insurrectionists. They're engaged in this willful attempt to nullify federal law and aid the occupation of the city by criminal invaders. That's what it is. They're invaders, no different. Their position is that the rioting will not stop unless ICE withdraws from Los Angeles and ceases the enforcement of federal immigration law.
Are blasting the actions, with courts being asked to weigh in. We are drilling down on all of this as more protests are planned across the country. My guests are Patrice Willoughby, Chief of Policy and Legislative Affairs for the NAACP, and Joseph Geevarghese, Executive Director of Our Revolution. Thank you both for spending some time with us with this very important issue. I want to start today with where things are. We have Latino leaders, civil rights groups denouncing the LA immigration raids, as are many Democratic lawmakers. President Trump, of course, continues to double down and saying that these raids will continue. Patrice, the NAACP is among the many groups taking issue with the raids and deployment of military on the streets. Explain why and what your assessment is of what has developed just over the past week.
Well, thank you for having me on. I think as we push back against authoritarianism, we want to ensure that people don't lose the forest for the trees. This administration has indicated that it intends to pull out the middle of all of the institutions that ensure democracy. And that includes multiracial coalitions of people in the country because of the electorate and the changing demographics of the country. What's transpiring now is part of their overall strategy, one, to divide communities of color, but also the othering that has taken place in the United States, where people don't care about a problem unless it is yours. We care about anyone who is marginalized and in a frontline community, and understand that this is just part of that authoritarian blueprint.
Joseph, Our Revolution, your organization, is condemning the deployment of the National Guard as well as the Marines to Los Angeles. First of all, talk to us real quick about what Our Revolution is and your position and what you want Capitol Hill lawmakers to do.
Sure. Again, good to be here, Harold. Our Revolution is a grassroots political organization that was started by Bernie Sanders after his 2016 presidential run. Okay. And our mission is to keep organizing progressives, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, so that we can elect more Bernie Sanders. We can pass policies that are progressive, that provide health care and education to every single American. And that we also make sure that the Democratic Party is a progressive party and doesn't align with corporations and corporate rule. And so our mission in this moment, and I think what the sister said is correct, we're sliding into authoritarianism. You opened with the clip of the president speaking at Fort Bragg. I mean, that is unprecedented to give a political speech in front of uniformed troops. I mean, that violates military rules and regulations. Troops are not supposed to show up in uniform for a political speech. That being said, that's where I think Donald Trump is really trying to abuse the powers that were entrusted with him, right? He's calling everything an emergency, whether it's the immigration crisis, there's an energy crisis, there's a trade crisis, and then he invokes emergency powers, rarely utilized. But he uses the cover of emergency. It's fictional, and he uses that to justify his actions. And so, in this case, we're calling on Congress, right, to really to question the president and to say, is there really an emergency that's happening on the ground in this case that legitimates the use of military force, right? Does it allow the president to override, go over the head of a governor to federalize the National Guard? Is there a justification to have U.S. military, Marines on the ground? But that being said, the question here is, our Congress, our elected officials are allowing Donald Trump to make an exception the rule. And the exception that's in our laws is there are exceptions for emergencies. They give the power to the president for emergencies. But is there an invasion and a rebellion happening? No. Is there a problem with oil production in this country? Is there an energy crisis? No. Is there a trade problem? Yeah, there are problems, but does that give him the power to levy tariffs? So all of that being said, we're calling on Congress to play its role as being not just the president's partner, but actually be a check on his power in this moment.
Patrice, to Joseph's point, I want to play something from California Governor Gavin Newsom from, I think it was yesterday, and then I want you to react on the other side.
Donald Trump's government isn't protecting our communities. They're traumatizing our communities. And that seems to be the entire point. California will keep fighting. We'll keep fighting on behalf of our people, all of our people, including in the courts.
Patrice.
Well, what Governor Newsom stated there is the blueprint that we see this administration enacting across the country, wherever there are immigrant communities. And there are many immigrant families that have people of mixed status. And that's just an indicator that the immigration system in the country is broken. That doesn't mean that there's an invasion. It means that Congress has failed repeatedly to enact rational, comprehensive immigration reform, because immigrants contribute a great deal to the economic life of this country. Often when they're not able to pull the benefits out, they are still paying taxes and still contributing to the economic lifeline, not just in cities, but in rural areas as well. So there's that. The fact that this administration has weaponized immigration and customs enforcement in communities, and in some cases using contractors and Homeland Security investigations, which is not typically a department that does interdiction or anything to do with crowds. They do investigations. But there have been people who are wearing face masks, who have sometimes been mislabeled wearing uniforms that cannot be identified as whether they really are federal actors. And all of this is devised to create chaos and hysteria, and to prevent people from being able to organize in ways that are meaningful and act on their own behalf. And it is a weaponization of the government against people, which is counter to anything we've ever seen in this country. And it is fundamentally un-American. The Statue of Liberty says, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses. It does not say, let's send off jackbooted thugs into neighborhoods and kidnap people off the street.
But Patrice, if I may quote the great prophet Cherie Whitfield from the Real Housewives of Atlanta, who's going to check me, boo? Because that's where we are. I mean, Joseph was saying, we're asking Congress, to do its job, but nobody's checking Donald Trump, Patrice. The courts, certainly, as it relates to Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, saying, we're going to continue to fight in the courts. They lost the fight relative to stopping the influx of these military forces coming into LA. Who's checking Donald Trump?
Well, people can check Donald Trump. And, Joseph understands this all too well in terms of the power of people organizing. And that is one reason why in California, they focused on David Huerta and SEIU, because SEIU and, union organizing is fundamentally baked in to the ethos of California. Checks and balances are critical in a democracy. This administration has focused on bullying Republican members of Congress. And this is not about Democrats and Republicans. This is about a constitutional framework that Congress has failed to uphold. In its role as the allocator of funds, the executive has also the ability to direct priorities, but within the lines of authority that are delineated in the Constitution. And so Congress needs to do its job. What has proven effective, and he has lost most of the cases that he's brought to court. He didn't lose this one about California, but he's lost a lot. And that shows that pushing back works, organizing works, people power works, and the courts work, but people need to stay engaged and to hold the members of Congress their feet to the fire.
Joseph, let me ask you real quick before the break. You've got about a minute or so. What is the genesis of the specific protests in Los Angeles? What was the linchpin that started this last week?
So one thing I would say is it was directed to the very heart of the Mexican American community in Los Angeles. The part of town that they hit was part of the original California before it became part of the United States, was the capital. And so it has a long history and a proud history of raising up immigrants and Americans. And so they really did strike at the heart of the community, a symbolic heart of the community. And I think local folks took offense because that's been a community that's been in existence before the United States of America was included California, for that matter. And I think that was a symbolic tipping point.
We are going to talk more about these issues, and I'm so glad that both of you are here to provide not only perspective, but information and education for those who may not be paying attention, but need to pay attention. So please, I need you both to just stay with us. We are going to take a quick break. Don't forget, you can hear this and every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com. The Original Quiet Storm with Raheem Devon is next on WHUR. This conversation continues on Sirius XM channel 141 and 96.3 HD2 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our conversation about the immigration crisis in America. My guests are Patrice Willoughby, Chief of Policy and Legislative Affairs for the NAACP, and Joseph Geevarghese. He is the Executive Director of Our Revolution. I want to go back to what we were talking about just before the break, Joseph, about kind of the genesis of this. And what has also happened over the past few days. I want to share what LA Mayor Karen Bass was talking about.
And it makes me feel like our city is actually a test case for what happens when the federal government moves in and takes the authority away from the state or away from local government. I don't think that our city should be used for an experiment to see what happens in the nation's second largest city. Well, maybe we can do this to other cities. But I heard today about something that is so over the top. Can you imagine having your annual appointment to ICE, your annual appointment? You're here, you might not be a citizen, but you have papers, and you are told that you need to go to the facility to check in. And then you are detained, and you go with your family and your kids, and the whole family is detained when you were legal and you were trying to maintain your legal status. So what this means then is that people are going to be afraid to maintain their appointments, which then pushes them into the closet, and they will fall out of status and then subject to arrest.
Joseph, is she right? Is this a test case?
This is a test case. I think it is incredibly likely, depending how the situation plays out in California, the court cases, I think it's entirely likely that we're going to see troops deployed in other democratic jurisdictions. I don't think you're going to see troops deployed where there's allies of Donald Trump in power, but you're going to see troops deployed in major cities that are run by Democratic mayors and city councils. And look, I agree that Los Angeles is a test case, just like Harvard was a test case. Donald Trump's waging a war on universities and intellectual freedom. He's waging a war on the free press. He's going after the Associated Press. He's suing ABC, CBS. Those are all test cases. At every level, he is going after every center of power and daring them to push back. And that's the challenge. And that's part of the reason that, I say we are sliding into authoritarianism. He is testing the waters of every center of power in our country, whether it's the media, whether it's the civil service, whether it's academics, whether it's local democratic leaders. And he's pushing the boundaries. And the thing is, if enough people cave, it's a green light. And in the case of, Harvard, I'm glad they're fighting. We need institutions to fight. In the case of the media, I'm glad that the AP decided to fight for its seat in the press pool in the Oval Office. But we need to get more institutions fighting. We can't have all of these law firms caving because that just further emboldens these, I would argue, illegal and unconstitutional acts. And so what happens in California, if the governor and the mayor and other electeds don't stand united, and the people don't stand united, I think there's a very good likelihood that this is going to spread.
Mm-hmm. Patrice, your thoughts about what Mayor Karen Bass was saying in that press conference from yesterday?
Well, she's absolutely correct, because in order for the rule of law to function, people have to believe in the rule of law and to believe that the institutions are actually fair. And we have seen this. But this is part of the game plan of what this administration has been doing, which is breaking things and then complaining that they're broken. When you disrupt the immigration legal processes by when people comply, they are punished. It is a disincentive for them to comply. Then you can complain that they're not complying. Therefore, you need to have an either harsher hand in order to force compliance. This is part of a game plan, and it's all aligned with how dictators have always put themselves into power. They do things like dismantle the civil service. They overreach on their executive power. They try to install only people who are loyal to them in positions of authority instead of getting the best ideas from a range of people. They demonize the media. And as Joseph has indicated, they really try to take out a kneecap any pushback from any entity that could bring checks and balances to the system. But what we have seen, again, is that the pushback works. For example, the law firms. The law firms that caved in to the administration have lost a ton of clients. They've had top partners leave and start their own firms, and they've attracted other clients. And then some of the clients have fired those law firms that capitulated, because why would anybody want to hire a firm that isn't going to stand up for themselves or their client, right? The same thing in the courts, like I said before. And that's why people are critically important in ensuring that none of the actions of the administration that are illegal go without being challenged at the ground level. Local officials really should get in line with that as well.
So now it's about to get complicated, as if it isn't complicated already. Certainly during the campaign, Trump was campaigning on getting rid of these so-called rapists, murderers, etc., and who were undocumented in the country illegally. And a lot of organizations were saying, well, this is racist because he's only focusing on brown people, maybe to a lesser extent, Black people. But because we do know that there are undocumented immigrants from Africa who are also here, who are caught up. Obviously, the low-hanging fruit from the media, the high-profile people are people of Latino descent, Hispanic descent. But today, and I'm sure you've seen this, is that the administration wants to transfer people who are here illegally to Guantanamo, but those people are also from Britain and Italy and France and Germany, Ireland, Belgium, the Netherlands, Lithuania, Poland, Turkey, and Ukraine. I'm reading this from the Washington Post. Joseph, what's happening? What's going on here? This is no longer about, members of the Latino community. Now it's anybody and everybody who's here illegally. What's going on?
I actually think it's bigger than that. There's a global nationalist movement that's taking over countries, whether it's Hungary or Russia, and at the center of that is a strong leader really getting people to own their ethnic national identity. And in this case, I think that's what Donald Trump is doing. He's othering everyone who's not, quote unquote, American, and he makes exceptions. But at the end of the day, I think it's a political exception, right? He's looking to empower his voting base and disempower anybody else who could be a threat. Now, part of this, is also, I think this is part of Donald Trump also telling a story, right? About we need strong borders. America needs to be America. I'm going to protect you. That was his narrative, right? Protect the American people. And I'm also going to fight for you and fight for good jobs, right? And bring back the jobs that were outsourced. So he has a narrative that he is leaning into. And you see that through all of his attacks, whether it's on immigrants or on the economic front. But that's I think a core part of this is a nationalist identity that the president is putting forward, and that is I think incredibly problematic and un-American, because that's not who we are as a country.
Patrice, I'm sure you have some thoughts about that as well. Yeah.
Well, I mean, absolutely, because immigrant communities are actually less likely to be involved in criminal activity. And immigrant communities that come to the United States are really the people who are movers and shakers, who are contributing to the growth and expansion economically of the United States. One of the things that has really puzzled me so much, and I think that it is an education gap, is that people don't understand that this country's dynamic quality comes from the range of life and life experiences and the ideas that have cross-pollinated throughout the entire country. And that does not lend itself to anything other than a multiracial democracy. I think that the othering is taking place is really counterproductive to the economic and the social growth of the country. I don't hear anyone saying that, but that dynamic quality of the United States has been what has made this the place that people want to come to, because it is it's an engine for progress. So, I'm waiting to hear corporate leaders and others to actually talk about openly that what he's doing is counterproductive for the country.
So, and here's the question, and I'll start with you, Patrice. First of all, can we all agree that there is an immigration problem in this country?
There's an immigration law problem.
Okay. I'll give you that. And if you want to remove the people who have been convicted, somebody's convicted of a crime and they are undocumented, wherever they are from, white, brown, black, it doesn't matter. If you are undocumented, you are convicted of killing somebody, get out of here. I think there are a whole lot of people I don't think there are many people who would disagree with that. But on the other part, if you're here and you're undocumented, but you're working, you started a business, you are paying taxes, your children are in school, you are contributing, and yet they're still being attacked. What's the answer, Patrice? I guess that's my question. If not what is happening now, then what is the answer? This isn't a Trump administration issue. This isn't a Biden administration issue. You could argue that this in recent history goes all the way back to Ronald Reagan.
Mm-hmm. It does. And Ronald Reagan was an internationalist. I mean, I think what needs to happen is that the immigration laws really need to contemplate the fact that, one, there are seasonal workers, and that people do like to come and go. I have never spoken to anyone who's immigrated forcefully, especially if they've left a bad environment in their own country, that doesn't want to go home. But they cannot go home. So let's create a rational system of immigration so that people can come. And if it's an economic job or economic benefit that they're seeking, that they come here, they pay their taxes in the United States. And if they want to stay, we provide a pathway for people to have citizenship and to normalize their status. I think that immigration should not be kicked around as a political football, and both Democrats and Republicans have used it as such in order to curry favor. That's absolutely wrong because it's antithetical to who we are in the mosaic of America. Secondly, if they're very concerned about criminal justice and in deporting people who are, quote, criminals, I think we should really take a hard internal look first and focus on white supremacy and hate crimes, the unresolved disappearances of people who are brown and black that happen and that are not investigated, as well as the misactions of police to rebuild trust between policing and communities of color. Let's make the laws of the country function better and bring rationality to the immigration system, because ultimately we are a country of laws and not of people.
Joseph, what do you believe the solution should be to this immigration crisis that we're in right now?
Look, I think honestly, part of this immigration problem was also brought about because of the free trade policies that were put in place by Democratic administrations, starting with Bill Clinton, continued by Barack Obama, which was a race to the bottom, right? Shipping jobs overseas and allowing things that used to be made in the United States for a living wage and good union benefits to be made in sweatshops in China and Vietnam and Mexico and other countries. And, if we had had a focus even earlier in making sure trade policy lifted everyone's boats, not just lowered our standard of living, but also raised our standard of living and raised the standard of living of our trading partners, I think people would stay in their countries. Because I think a big reason they come is for either political freedom or economic freedom or both, right? But it is the economic dislocation that has led to this moment, I would argue. And so that's part of the thing we need to fix. I think the other thing that's worth pointing out, Harold, is that, the Democrats and Joe Biden wanted to pass Trump's immigration bill, the Republican immigration bill. And Donald Trump, as a candidate, phoned it in and said, don't pass this because it would take away, his sexy campaign issue. And, so that's part of the problem. This is theater. It's not necessarily people of goodwill trying to figure out a solution so that all of us can live, more safely and be able to thrive. No, there's a self-interest, a political self-interest here that's playing out. And it's unfortunate because the way it's being carried out, it's violating people's rights and their human dignity. People are getting swept up without due process. It's not targeted necessarily on criminals. It's very broad, and that is problematic because it sweeps up innocence in this machine, and we should not tolerate that. And that's why I think there should be outrage.
Well, Joseph, you just said that this is theater. Well, this is playing out on stages, not just in LA. It's playing out on stages in Washington, D.C., Chicago, Seattle, New York. And these are plays that are becoming increasingly more violent to continue, the metaphor. So what are your concerns as these demonstrations, bubble up, become more muscular and clashing with police? I mean, where does this end, Joseph?
Well, I think there's going to be an escalation this weekend. Our organization, in coalition with many, many others, we're mobilizing for a No King's Day. mass national mobilization to send a message to the president that the majority is not supportive of what he's doing with immigrants, or what he's doing with the federal government, or what he's doing by attacking the free press. And key to that is that our people are engaging in a nonviolent, non-confrontational way. Now, that being said, my fear is, there's always bad actors, some fringe element, and sometimes that's, it's a plant, it's subterfuge from the other side. But there's some action that's used to trigger a crackdown. And that's my fear, right? And, but that's why we've been very deliberate about making sure that we're training people in nonviolent tactics, and exercising and making sure they know they have rights to exercise, but to exercise them in a peaceful way. I think the key to winning here is no different than what Dr. King did or Gandhi did, right, is non-compliance, but non-violent non-compliance with the regime and what they're doing. So that's the important part. And I think the vast majority of Americans in this country are non-violent, and they're going to participate peacefully in large numbers this weekend in opposition to this president and what he's doing. And unfortunately, yes, there will probably be some fringe elements that will try to inflame the situation, but that's not really what this country is about or what the people are doing.
So, Patrice, allow me to be hyperbolic. As I said before, President Trump campaigned on just getting rid of those who had committed crimes. But now we are seeing that even those who were going through the process were being, pulled either, out of the hallway leading to the court hearing, where they were going to establish, legal citizenship. They're snatching everyone. How? And I want to, I really want to notate this for later conversations. And I hope I don't have to say I told you so. But is it possible that the children of immigrants who were born here may be, the next target, or their parents or their grandparents who have been here for decades and decades and decades and have not heard a fly, but now are they going to start knocking on the doors of our parents who may have overstayed their visas, but have been, law-abiding citizens? Is that where this is going?
I think that it's critical at this point for Americans of goodwill to understand that these challenges that we are facing don't just affect one community, because, as you've indicated, it is a slippery slope. When the civil rights of one group are eroded, it erodes civil rights for everyone. And so to that point, any abrogation of the law and the civil rights of folks should not be taken laying down. And I'm so glad that there is a focus on peaceful protest across the country, because it should be a cross-section of the American people that expresses how dissatisfactory this administration is. And they know it. They know that their actions are unpopular. When you have to enact emergency powers in order to get anything done, that is a sign of dysfunction and that you are unable to govern. This is a fundamental failure of governance of this administration, because their policies are unpopular, and conservatives and progressives who believe in the Constitution don't agree with them. So there's that. The other thing is, military, the National Guard, they are sworn to uphold the Constitution, not the policies of an administration, but the Constitution. And so sworn law enforcement officers and military should keep that in mind, because there is no obligation to undertake an unlawful order. But secondly, third, the National Guard being deployed in different places, that's going to be something that we see over and over again, because they are using that within the authority of supplementing the work of immigration and customs enforcement. National Guard are typically only called out for domestic matters by a governor. A president can only enact the National Guard under an emergency when it needs to shore up federal law enforcement. These protests in LA have been sporadic. And what the media is not showing is that when people are driving around LA, you don't see it. I've had colleagues that are out in LA and they've been reporting, where are the protests? And so the way that it's also been portrayed is something to keep in mind, and something that people should ask questions about, because what you are seeing on and being talked about by this administration is not necessarily the state of play.
Yeah. Joseph, I'll let you have the last word on just where we are today, which could very well change tomorrow, but I'll let you wrap us up with a comment.
Well, we have a lot of challenges that we're facing as a nation, and I think they seem overwhelming. And I think a lot of people I talk to feel powerless in the face of all of these dramatic changes and a strongman president. But that being said, we have been in situations, our country has been in situations like this. People in our country have been oppressed and have fought back, and we have made progress. And so I would say the last word is that if we, the people, act, I think we can beat back all of the things that we talked about on this broadcast. I think the important thing, though, is that we don't lose hope, that we take action, we raise our voices, and we put on our marching shoes.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Joseph Geevarghese, Patrice Willoughby, thank you both so much for sharing again your expertise and your informed opinions. We will continue to watch this, and certainly down the road, I would love to have you both back to continue this conversation.
Thank you, Harold. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks. That is the Daily Drum for this Wednesday, June 11th. I'm Harold Fisher. Good night.